I'm really pleased to be able to introduce two more of our AWF-funded research sessions this afternoon. And the first person I'd like to introduce who's going to present for us is Leslie Jessamine, who is going to present on breeding programs on human health and the associations with animal care.
Thank you. So I am Leslie Jessamine. I work at Scotland Rural College. I am a psychologist working in the animal welfare team. So I've been a little bit ambitious today in terms of my timing. So like Rowena, hold on to your chairs. I'll try not to skim over things too much. So the study that we did was looking at the super prolific breeding programs. This is a study I did alongside Emma Baxter, and looking at the impact that it has on human health and the subsequent impact that has on animal care. So a bit of background, apologies, I'm not an animal welfare scientist, so if I make an error, I do apologise. But the number of piglets that have been born per sow has increased from 11 to 19.6. However, the number of teats have not increased, so we still have, on average, teats of 14. The larger litters are also associated with some welfare problems, with compromised piglets, increase in low birth weight, competition udder. And my colleagues at SRUC have done a significant amount of research looking at the health and welfare impacts that these breeding for larger litters have had. But what we don't know is the impact that it has on the stock person, because with these larger litters comes this increase in the stock person's intervention. The number of decisions that these stock persons have to make around culling decisions and euthanasia decisions as well. So this was the goal of our study, was to look at the impact on the stock person's mental health and well-being, because we want to look at that through a one welfare lens, because it's quite clear that when the person's mental health is impacted, then it compromises their capacity to be a good animal care giver. So just quickly, because I don't have too much time, we carried out 17 interviews with a range of stock people and animal welfare technicians, and we framed our questions around specific psychological theories, because I'm a psychologist, that's where my go-to, and then we analysed those using reflexive thematic analysis. So we had these are the themes that I'm going to speak about 100 miles per hour today, because they're quite big. Large litters, vexations, you just have to get on with it. Euthanasia, stress, and the joys and woes are woven fine. The other themes that we had are below, and if anyone's interested, I can speak about those during coffee. So the first theme is large litter vexations, and this was a theme that came about because the stock persons were really had this shared feeling around frustrations, worry, concerns, and anger for some around large litters. And so the theme there that was broken down into two sub-themes, the first sub-theme being just makes no sense. So they just could not get to grips with why we were doing this, so that they had clear frustrations with the breeding industry and the farming organisations in terms of their roles with hyperprolific breeding. And there is a clear sense that it seemed to cause more problems than it resolved, and an identification that there was an overall inefficiency and waste in the system. The other theme that came about, and this came about probably more than any other times, was, oh my God, what am I going to do with all of these piglets? And these were stock persons who were going into the farms in the morning, and lots of piglets to deal with, and the sows to deal with too. And so that they were dealing with the stresses of that, these heavy workloads and relentlessness of it all. And these are just some of the quotes from these. So the first two is to do with the frustration in the orange bubbles. It just seems utterly pointless. They have a sow with 14 teats, and you're breeding for to have 20 piglets. And then the other one was where people were making comparisons, that we don't make those same demands of other species. And this example here was that we don't ask cows to have 5 calves. And then in terms of, oh my God, what am I going to do with them all? The people said consistently over that they just had nowhere to put them, that they had more piglets than they had space, or more piglets than they had mothers, for example. The other theme was around you just have to get on with it. And this has clear implications for mental health amongst our stock persons. So what was clear from this just have to get on with it theme was this compartmentalizing and a desensitization, and clear evidence, which is alarming in terms of an emotional numbness. The other issue was this idea that they had to be resilient. And so if you look at the sorts of phrases that people were using, you have to emotionally detach, you just have to get on with it, and it's just a sort of emotional numbness. And that clearly isn't good for overall mental health. There was also this shared belief that there was a need to be resilient and pragmatic over actually being aware of protecting one's own mental health. And so resilience was seen as a sort of badge of honour, a feature of someone's personality and identity. So that became part of their occupational identity. And these are just some of the examples. You just have to switch off. You have to desensitize. And as I said, some of them, the people that I spoke to, were talking about the resilience as that badge of honour. I've never been a stress head particularly. And so people said that so consistently, that is why it was identified as a theme. Euthanasia stress was also quite clear. So what choice do I have? So people found that when they had some control and choice, that was the central organising concept of that theme. When they had more control in terms of the method, more control in terms of not delaying euthanasia, for example, and choice or the method, what we found was that the protection against the mental health problems was greater and risk was reduced. So again, when it was a welfare decision, we also found that euthanasia stress was much less. So people would say things like, that's my way of looking at it. I have to euthanize them because there's something wrong. So when it was to end suffering, that had a significant impact on reducing euthanasia stress. And I wanted to end on this one because some of it does come across as quite negative, but what was quite clear was that there was compassion satisfaction rather than compassion fatigue. We didn't find any evidence that there was a reduction in empathy amongst our stock persons, actually quite the opposite. But what was clear in speaking to people was that those two things were inextricably linked, that just because they had job satisfaction didn't mean that they didn't also have stresses. No one that I spoke to didn't express some stress of dealing with these larger litters. So these are some of the example quotes of people who enjoyed their work. It's mums and babies all day, every day. What's not to love? Or it makes you feel really good. I think that outweighs the stress. As you can see, those two things where, the person wasn't without stress. And probably one of my favourite quotes, I love working with pigs. I prefer pigs to people. Quite a few people said that. So the conclusions then is, it is a small study, but we found saturation. The people were saying the same thing over and over again. I found saturation at 5 people. Once I got to 5 people, so even up to 17, they were still saying exactly the same thing. What was clear was that everyone was protecting their own mental health, and there was an expectation of resilience, and that expectation is unsustainable. There's an expectation for both the human and the animal to be resilient. And so what's clear, that points us in the direction that we need to equip our staff with the right physical and mental tools to manage these large litters. What was also clear, and as a psychologist, this is something that I really picked up on, was this desensitization. And that's problematic, because when someone desensitizes, what happens is there's an assuage of their emotions. They're not dealing with their emotions. So those things that might otherwise be negative become subjectively less negative or more positive. And that is difficult. It can also erode the relationship that the individual has with their animal. So although we didn't find evidence of that with our participants, it's possible that it might happen in the future. So the recommendations is to mitigate these negative effects, debriefing, and include some training. Obviously, I'm going over time, so you can just read those, and I'm happy to speak about those in the break.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Are there any questions from the floor? Any hands? Oh, there we go. One just here. Yeah, I'll come back to you.
Oh, no, go for it.
No, you go for it, Claire.
Oh,
You know.
sorry, it's me again, Claire, Cats Protection. This goes with my question earlier. Why we don't need to equip stock people to cope with bigger litters if we reduce litters.
Yeah.
And why is that not what we're doing? Why it's stressful for them, it's stressful for the pigs, it's stressful for me sitting here. Yeah, why aren't we doing that?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, it's part of it. It is part of the system. It's like and that's one of the points that I made, that we're putting the responsibility of resilience onto both human and to animal. But what we need to change is the system. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So, but again, it's not just one person that changes that. We have to change the whole system.
Thank you. We have a question.
Oh, it was basically going to be that, and the question was, how do we put pressure as a profession? This is probably actually open to the floor. Like, what do we do about that? Do we have power to put pressure on breeding companies, or the industry, or the industry's vets? What's the answer, everybody? Let's have some action.
Any further comments or questions on that? Okay, we will leave that there for the. Thank you, Leslie, so much for a great presentation. So now pleased to introduce Niamh, who is going to talk to us about on-farm decision-making and the role of culling in sheep lameness management and breeding strategies.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a piece of research looking at sheep lameness and the role of breeding and culling. I'm going to change the focus a little bit for this talk and talk about the concept of contextualized care and how farmers and vets are working together to manage sheep lameness. So, lameness is any condition or injury affecting the feet or legs of an animal and then impacting their gait. Sheep lameness is a significant welfare issue that causes pain and suffering in animals. There are increased labour, time and financial costs associated with managing and treating sheep lameness. And it's a priority in the DEFRA animal health and welfare pathway. In order to explore how farmers and vets work together to manage lameness, we conducted 6 two-hour online focus groups, 5 with farmers and 1 with vets. And for this talk, I'm going to focus on these 3 objectives. 1, to explore contextualized care in relation to farm animal veterinary practice, to present evidence that contextualized care is being practiced in the management of sheep lameness, and to identify some of the challenges that limit its potential effectiveness in practice. So first of all, just a little bit of background on contextualized care. This is a concept that originates from a call by the group Veterinary Humanities UK for the veterinary industry to move away from the goal of gold standard care towards a more holistic approach that pays greater attention to the human client, animal patient, and vet contexts. It's important to note here that much of the literature on contextualized care is focused on companion animals, not on farm animals. And then this research has been conducted at a time of ongoing change within the farm vet profession, something that Rustin et al. Call a re-professionalization of the industry. This is a kind of changing relationship between vets and their farmer clients, from one that was quite hierarchical, with the vet as a kind of expert authority figure, a kind of knowledge broker between veterinary science and on-farm practice, to one where farmers and vets are working more in collaboration with each other. The concept of contextualized care is not without its criticisms. One criticism is that it's just reinventing the wheel. This is something that vets are doing already, and it's just a new name for an old concept. The second is that it might unintentionally be promoting resource-limited or cost-limited care. The third is that it's increasing vets' workload. You are adding complexity to a job that's already very complex by asking vets to change the way they interact with their clients in a way that could be really difficult to put into practice. And finally, it's important to consider whose context is being prioritized. This relationship involves three different individuals: the vet, the client, who's the farmer, and the patient, who's an animal. Under the law, animals are property. They're property with protections that other speakers have talked about, but they're still property. And this status as property is really important to consider in farming, where decisions around the care of farm animals are strongly influenced by their productive and economic value. So, I'm not going to read these quotations out, but you can look at them while I'm talking. One important finding is that vets are already practicing contextualized care. They are carefully considering the farmers and their farming contexts when providing advice and giving care. This sort of contextualized care is in relation to the different farming systems. Is it an upland farm, a lowland farm? Is it a pedigree flock, a commercial flock? It's also in relation to individual farmers and their animals. For example, breeding and non-breeding animals, and the farmer's hopes for their flock. Do they want to increase their flock size? Do they want to decrease the flock size? It's also considering the farmer's situation and their life and context. Do they have the resources available to tackle lameness? Do they have the time? Do they have the labor to do so? It's worth noting here that this isn't just driven by vets, but it's also driven in response to farmers' needs for relevant advice to their farm and their business. So, how is this contextualized care being facilitated? Well, importantly, by relationship building. This is a particularly revealing quotation from a vet. The suggestion here is that lameness as a health condition and a welfare issue is well known and well understood. And what it requires is for the people involved to respond to it and respond to it together. Key here is that it's two-way communication between the farmer and the vet, and that this communication needs to be supportive and to be giving praise, but also at times be able to be critical of each other. Vets describe providing advice as a gradual process that takes into consideration what farmers are able to do now, and then slowly build on this to improve practice. This requires an understanding of and an empathy with their clients. Vets in this research were seeking and utilizing both ad hoc moments to provide care and more formalized meetings. So these ad hoc moments were when vets were called out to a different issue, often a firefighting issue, and used this as an opportunity to discuss lameness. Prior research has described this as somewhat problematic, but the participants in this investigation said that this was an important skill to be able to utilize, to find these ad hoc moments to talk about an issue that might not be a priority for farmers. Vets were also using more formalized meetings, particularly the action of flock health planning. This is a dedicated time for farmers and vets to sit together and talk about lameness and co-create a management pathway. And important here was considering a flock health plan as a living document. It's not a tick box exercise. It's something that grows and evolves with the farm, with the flock, and with the farmer. These moments to meet and discuss lameness can be both in person, but are increasingly online, especially since COVID. Farmers are using WhatsApp or taking pictures and emailing them to vets to get kind of an immediate conversation going. However, there are challenges to practicing contextualized care in practice, particularly around lameness in sheep. One issue is the relative invisibility of lameness, and there can be a degree of barn blindness around the condition, and fatalism in farmers. In these situations, lameness is almost accepted as an inevitable part of farming. The presence of continually chronically lame sheep is seen as kind of inevitable, and then lameness can be underestimated. It's often the case that vets have to encourage farmers to see lameness on their farm and then respond to it. There's also the issue of the high cost of vets versus the low value of sheep. And this quotation from a farmer kind of illustrates that. But it's worth noting that value is constructed in different ways. A sheep may be valued financially, but also genetically and relationally. People have relationships with their animals, even farmers. There's also the human element. Vets in this investigation discussed how significant lameness issues were often a symptom of wider issues on the farm. In these situations, the vets are required to provide empathy and counsel to the farmer. Care here by the vets is enacted for the farmer, with the result that the farmer is better able to care for their sheep. So, in conclusion, care is complex and complicated. It's not an easy thing to do. It requires proximity, attentiveness, and encounter. And it's important to acknowledge that farmers and vets do care about the animals that they're working with. And this quotation from a farmer is a really good example of this, especially for lameness. We all have feet. We all know what it's like to get a blister on our feet, and farmers understand that too. And it's just facilitating these moments for these individuals to get together and care for these animals. Thank you very much. Before I finish, sorry, that was a bit preemptive, I'd like to thank the Animal Welfare Foundation, my co-investigator, Beth Clark, who you saw earlier, the National Sheep Association for providing steering and helping us recruit farmers and vets, and all the sheep keepers and vets who took part in this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niamh. Any questions? Yeah, I have one at the front here. Thank you. Just second row. Thank you.
It's not really a question, it's just to say thank you. We do hear so much about contextualised care in the companion animals, and it's lovely to see it in a different sector and how it's coming through. So that's fabulous. So just a big thank you.
Thank you. Any more? No? Okay, join me in thanking Niamh once again. Thank you, Niamh. Thank you to all of our speakers who presented research updates today. They were all really excellent. Thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to our next speakers and panel for the next session, which is Pet Fish in Focus.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's absolutely wonderful to be here, and I want to thank the organisers, the Animal Welfare Foundation, for inviting me to have the honour and pleasure of chairing this session and also speaking at it. I'm joined by two expert speakers, Matt Bond and Matt Matsalar. So we're going to focus on fish, and these are highly understudied in comparison to mammals. So I was very excited by the fact that I'd get to spend time with you now to talk about fish and focus on whether they're sentient, how important their welfare is, and also talk about the pet fish trade. My name's Professor Lynn Snedden. I am the leader of the Aquatic Animal Welfare Group at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. My group uses science to drive the agenda with the improved treatment of aquatic animals. We focus on fishes, decapod crustaceans, and cephalopods. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank Pets and Mars Fish Care, our sponsors, who've enabled us to run this session. So very grateful to them. And we're going to start by asking you your opinion. So I want to hear from you what you think about fishes. So we're going to start with a Slido poll. Now, I do fear I'm preaching to the converted, but please give me your knee-jerk responses to these questions. So first question is, are fishes sentient? So I think we've probably stopped just about there. Thank you to everybody who answered that question. So we can see 73% said yes. Our next question is about veterinary training and whether you think welfare of fishes is adequately covered. And that was a fast response. Straight in there. Okay, so I think that's a resounding no, really. 87% of people think no. And our final question is, should fishes be given the same protection and veterinary treatment as mammals? So again, the answer is yes, which conflicts with the answer to the last question, but that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your answers. I'll now move on to my own talk, and I'm going to cover whether fishes are sentient beings and whether we should be protecting them. So what I'll talk about is, first off, defining sentience for you, and then I'll present scientific evidence that fishes fulfill those criteria, and then briefly talk about the wider implications. Now, this is the definition that I use. I realize there are many other definitions out there, but this is the one that I like. And we see a sentient being has some ability because we don't want to be anthropomorphic. Fishes are not going to be like us. So do the animals have some ability to do the following? And the first thing that we can test is whether they are able to form relationships with each other within a species with conspecifics, or between species? So can they form relationships? Do they have some form of cognitive ability? Are they able to learn new tasks and remember them? Can they make strategic behavioral decisions based upon the pros and cons of any situation and behave adaptively? Are they able to experience positive affective states like happiness, pleasure, contentedness, or negative affective states like pain, fear, and stress? And does seeing another one in that state affect them? And finally, do they show some evidence of consciousness or self-awareness? Do they have an understanding of I and how I relate to the world? So these are experiments that we can do to test whether fishes fulfill these criteria. So I don't have time to talk about all of them, obviously, so I'm going to take some examples. So the first question we can ask is, do fishes form relationships? And the answer is yes. Rabbit fishes, which are a coral reef species, do communicate very complicated signals to each other, and they act beneficially for the species. And these are rabbit fishes here. What you can see is different species, and they live in pairs. And one of the pairs acts in this manner. It's heads up, it's being vigilant and looking for predators, whereas the other member of the pair has head down, foraging in the crevices. And this kind of precisely matched behavior, where they signal to each other their intentions and mirror each other, is called direct reciprocity. And that's rarely seen in mammals and birds, and here it is seen in a fish. And it benefits both of them. And I'll show you why in this video. So what we can see here is the fishes. One is pointed upwards, looking for predators, while the other is penetrating much deeper into crevices and getting more food. And they actually precisely match each other. Now that requires quite high-level processing of signals and intentions. What is one of the other benefits of this? You can see the fishes are being vigilant, then they scatter, and they're safe as the predator comes by. So they're acting beneficially for each other. Another example is the very famous grouper moray eel, which show cooperative hunting, and this is between species relationships. So again, we have this precise communication. You can see the groupers coming up. Hey mate, do you fancy going hunting, to the moray eel? Moray eel says yes, and then off they go. And you can see the tail of the moray eel just behind it. So off they go hunting together. And then what you see is the grouper is pointing its head down, and it's basically pointing to prey that it can't get to, but the moray eel can come in with its eel-like body and flush those prey out. And these two species are more successful hunting together than they would be on their own. So fish do form relationships. What about learning and memory? Are they capable of complex tasks? And this is an experiment by Kate Newport and colleagues where they looked at archerfish. And these are little tropical fish which spit up into the leaf canopy and knock off insects and eat them. But here they use this as a training paradigm. And the archerfish were given choice of two faces, as you can see here. They would aim and spit at the right face, and one face was rewarding, so they got a food reward. And the study found that they could actually remember up to 44 faces, and even when the face was rotated, they could recognize the rewarding face. And here's just a video to show you how this works. The fish spits at the face and gets a food reward. Wonderful, isn't it? What about, let's move on to positive affective states, which I think is particularly challenging in fishes. However, we can look at this species of fish. This is actually a model of this species. It's a cleaner fish which sets up cleaning stations on coral reefs. And it gets large prey animals coming in to be cleaned. And this little fish will bite off parasites on these giant prey fish. It'll go inside their mouths and in their gills. And yet the prey fish don't eat them. Sorry, the predator fish don't eat them. Why is that? Well, these little fish give the predator a massage with their pelvic fins. So this study set out to determine what was going on here. So we have a client fish, this surgeon fish. They are then presented with a moving model with these brushes on, or they were presented with no movement. And what happened? This is the surgeon fish, you can see here, is actually voluntarily lining itself up to get a massage. And so when the authors of the study took blood from these animals, they found that the cortisol levels, the stress hormone, was lower in massage fish compared to non-massage fish. So just like me after a day at the spa, I'm a much nicer person and calmer. Now, what about negative affective states? And I've worked for over 20 years looking at the question of pain perception in fishes. And we've done a lot of recent work looking at zebrafish in the laboratory because they're a model species, but they're also a very popular pet species. And we've monitored the fish, and we've looked at undisturbed fish, and then we've looked at typical laboratory procedures which cause tissue damage, which would give rise to pain. And so for the example I'm going to show you is a fin-clipped fish. This is done routinely for genomic screening, done under anesthesia. So I'm sorry if anybody's offended by the next two videos. The first video is a control video, and here we have a pair of zebrafish. They're often held in pairs for breeding, and as you can see, they're swimming all around the tanks, swimming in mid-water, constantly moving, interacting with one another. Then when we fin clip one of them, and apologies for anyone that's offended, what you can see is this one has been fin clipped. It's sitting on the bottom. It's not moving or very reactive. And it's basically immobile for a prolonged period. And if we give this animal pain-relieving drugs, we can prevent those negative changes in behavior. So there is ample evidence for pain in fishes. Now, finally, we come to consciousness, and this is a really interesting study, again, on our friend the cleaner fish. And I'm sure you know the mirror recognition test is the gold standard for showing an animal's conscious. You show the animal the mirror, then you put something on it, and if the animal seeks to remove that, then that means that it recognizes that it's self and there's something weird on it and it takes it off. So there's recognition there. And in this study, the authors actually sought to do exactly that, but except they put a red dot on the throat of the cleaner fish. And I'll just show you an example of this. Here is the cleaner fish here. It has a red dot in the throat, and it's looking at itself, and it performs throat scraping where it tries to remove the red dot. Now, there was a whole hoo-ha about this study, and basically it's highly criticized. And the authors themselves were pretty annoyed by this and said, if this was an elephant waving its trunk, you'd all say, hooray, great, it's conscious, of course it is. But when it's a fish, people sort of have a lot of skepticism. And the skepticism was that you put something on the fish, it's mechanical, it's an irritation. That's why they're throat scraping. So then the authors of this study went and did another study where what they did is they showed the fish a picture of itself with a red dot. So the animal itself did not have a red dot in it, but it saw a picture of itself. And here we see the animal get shown this picture with the red dot. And we get throat scraping, even though there's no red dot there. So it does indeed recognize itself. So there is evidence for consciousness in fishes. And if anybody's interested, Don Broom's book on animal welfare and sentience is a great starting point. And I've only touched upon a few examples. I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I'd get dragged off stage. If you're interested in the mental capacities of fishes, Cullen Brown and I wrote a really interesting chapter. I don't get any money for this, so hopefully your library has it. So what are the wider implications? Very briefly, we farm fishes, we catch them in high numbers, and we use them as a foodstuff. Some people like going out and doing this recreationally or as a sport. But we're interested in pet fish, and they are the most numerous pet. 1 in 10 households in the UK have fish, over 4,000 species in public aquaria. And we also use them in experimentation, the second most numerous model. We use more fishes than rats in experiments. And so at all stages here, we need good veterinary treatment, and that's very important. In terms of pain management in the lab, I've written a report with some great colleagues where we say analgesia should be used in all invasive procedures, except when you're studying pain itself. And in terms of pet fish welfare, I've been interviewed by lots of magazines. This is one, Practical Fish Keeping, based in the UK, where I talked about the science that we do and about pain in fishes. And they ran a poll on their website, their Facebook website, where you can see 96% of 460 people said yes, fish experience pain. So thanks to the fish for all this work, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. And so we have another expert speaker. We've got Matt Bond from Owata, and he's going to tell us about the industry aspects. Matt's role is to provide scientific and technical advice on a diverse range of issues such as welfare, biosecurity and conservation, to ensure the trade body is basing its advice, guidance and information on the best available knowledge. He also leads an Owata's evidence programme supporting partner-sponsored PhDs and master's students, examining key areas of interest to the tropical fish industry. In addition, he oversees Owata's City and Guilds training programmes aimed at those who work within the industry to help promote higher standards within the retail trade. He received his bachelor's degree in marine and freshwater biology from the University of Essex, where his research projects focused on productivity of zooplankton populations. He continued at Essex to complete his PhD in evolutionary ecology of fish populations before staying on as a lecturer in marine biology, and so I give the floor to Matt.
Thank you for that, Lynn. So we've been under strict instructions to keep things nice and brief. I was told at the very beginning of today that I need to swing the scythe, so I've tried to do that as best I can, but if I am going on a little bit too long, someone give me a signal or start falling asleep or something, and I'll just try and speed up. So just a bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about who Owata are. That's the Ornamental Aquatic Trade Association, so you can see why we say Owata quite a lot. Talk about some of the legislation that governs the trade, how industry standards and guidance sit on top of that, the importance of training and education for delivering welfare needs, and I'm very briefly going to touch on some of the practicalities of welfare if I'm doing all right on time. So Owata is the standard setting and representative body for the aquatics trade in the UK. And that means that we have over 800 member businesses which cover all breadth of the trade. So going from your retail outlets all the way through to your importers, wholesalers, manufacturers, you name it. If you're involved in the aquatic industry, we're there for you. So we set standards for the industry to follow, but we also provide guidance for them as well to help them deliver on those welfare outcomes. As Lynn said, we're also a City and Guilds accredited training body. I won't touch on that too much. I'll talk about that later. And I want to talk briefly about our evidence-driven approach. So one of the things that we really want to try and do is we continually try and review our standards and our guidance, and we do that on the best possible evidence. We know that there are knowledge gaps about the trade, and we try and seek to fill those knowledge gaps so we can eventually review our standards and guidance going forward. So a bit of an overview of the UK aquatics trade. As Lynn mentioned, there are a lot of fish in the UK being kept as pets. They're the most populous pet in the UK, so there's more numbers of fish in UK homes than there are cats or dogs. 15% of UK households in 2024 have an aquarium, and 11% have an outdoor pond. So that's lots of pet fish living in the UK that need to have their welfare needs met. And in terms of how the trade is split, so you have freshwater and you have marine. Marine is typically more specialist experienced keepers that keep marines, and that's reflected in the numbers of fish that get imported into the UK. So generally speaking, it hovers around about the 80-20 mark in favour of freshwater. So there's regulation throughout the supply chain, and it is a global supply chain. The majority of the fish that you see in the pet shop haven't originated in the UK. And welfare in source countries is often delivered and regulated in a variety of different ways, dependent on the sourcing method, so aquaculture or wild collection, for example. And welfare may also be included within other legislation as well as welfare. So, for example, within the Maldives, welfare is an aspect of fisheries regulation, whereas in Australia, as another example, there's specific animal welfare legislation which covers the welfare needs of fish. And these regulations can include specifications on appropriate animal handling, husbandry, that kind of thing. Sitting alongside welfare legislation, you also have biosecurity-related legislation which prevents disease outbreaks and the introduction of invasive species. What sits on top of government regulation, I think, are industry standards which operate internationally through bodies such as Ornamental Fish International, who we work with quite extensively, as well as training programs for those that are handling fish within the pet trade. Whilst fish travel in the air, if any of you have been on a long-haul flight from the Far East, it's quite possible that you've been sitting above lots and lots of boxes of ornamental fish that are travelling over to the UK. And while they're travelling into the UK, they're regulated by the IATA regulations. Now, these regulations are regularly reviewed by vets and other industry experts and stipulate how fish must be transported to safeguard their welfare in transit. And these stipulations include things like regulation of temperature, adequate provision of oxygen, maintenance of water quality, that kind of thing. Once fish arrive at the UK and they arrive at the border, they're subject to documentary checks. So I'm talking about things like health certificates, and that specifies that fish are disease-free and okay to come into the UK, and physical checks for illness and injury before they can get released to the importer. And also, for certain species, there are additional checks that are applied. So if you've got an endangered species that's covered by CITES regulations, they will have additional checks on them. And also, if they're a species that's susceptible to certain diseases that the UK controls, they will also have additional checks that are applied at the border. Once the fish move on from the border, like any commercial movement of animals, they're governed by the welfare of animals and transport orders. And this means that anyone that transports fish has to have an authorization from APHA. And fish travelling onwards from international travel will meet that gold standard of the IATA regulations. So I'm going to skip over the pet shop bit next, because I'm going to go into a bit more detail later. And of course, the fish in the home, like all pets, are covered by the Animal Welfare Act, and keepers are legally obliged to meet the welfare needs of animals and their care. So, thinking about how fish are sold in the UK, this is governed by the licensing of activities involving animals regulations, and these are delivered through inspections by local authorities, and businesses can be inspected every 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on what conditions are met. So there are minimum standards within the regulations, and then there are also higher standards. And if you meet more of the higher standards for welfare, then you might only be inspected every 2 or 3 years. And within LIA, there's general guidance on record keeping, adequate staff training, so husbandry needs can be met. But there's also species group specific guidance as well. So for fish, that'd be what the water quality is going to be a big one. And in addition to that, it's a legal requirement for care information to be provided to keepers for the species that are being sold in pet shops. And that can take multiple forms. So that can take the form of care sheets, species-specific care sheets, general husbandry guidance, but also verbal advice. And I think that's quite an important thing to bear in mind here. Unlike a lot of other pet sectors, this trade deals in many thousands of species. So there's going to be lots of different potential welfare needs that need to be communicated to the keeper, particularly things like compatibility. Most of the fish that are kept in the UK are kept in what are called community tanks. So those are multi-species communities, and the people that work in pet shops often are very adept at saying, these species work together, you might want to avoid these species with those combinations, that kind of thing. So sitting on top of all that regulation is industry standards and guidance. So we have a code of conduct for all of our member businesses. And to help them achieve that code of conduct on things like welfare and biosecurity, we also provide various different bits of guidance which helps make it digestible for trade and aims to educate trade. And education is a really important part of delivering for welfare, both for keepers and for industry, and that's a really big part of what we do. So the City and Guilds accredited training programs, they're designed for industry, but increasingly we're finding these are being undertaken by lots of other sectors as well. So research scientists and local authority inspectors, also some keepers that just want to improve their knowledge, that's quite common as well. We also deliver practical training to a lot of the local authority inspectors that are inspecting shops regularly. So you'll find that some local authority inspectors do have an animal welfare background. There's lots that don't. So they are inspecting pet shops one day and then they'll be inspecting taxis or food outlets the other day. So it's really important to us to make sure that they have a base knowledge of fish welfare before they go out and inspect pet shops. So they're asking pertinent questions to fish welfare. We also think consumer education is really important. So care sheets is another thing that we've invested quite heavily in, and these care sheets have been reviewed by industry experts and vets as well, specialist fish vets as well, and they're the widest range of pet care sheets available on the market in the UK today. And those care sheets have been really useful to allow us to feed into this scheme called Pet Know-How. I don't know if anyone's heard about this, but this is a new education scheme aimed at keepers, and it's been done in conjunction with the Pets Charity and various other veterinary groups. And the idea is that rather than lots of prolonged questioning at the pet shop, you can send a prospective owner away who's like, I'm interested in buying a fish. And you send them away, and Pet Know-How has a huge bank of resources of care information and for fish at a very granular level. And then those people, they look through those resources, they go away and they take a 10-question quiz, 100% pass rate. And then once they complete that quiz and they pass it, they get a PDF which says, I've done my homework on this species, and I'm ready to talk to you about the things I need to do to own this fish. So in terms of practicalities of welfare, I'm going to whiz through some of this. I'm more than happy to talk about this in a bit more detail after this. I'm very conscious of time. But in terms of the suitable environment for fish and how that's delivered, maintaining good water quality is the primary driver for welfare outcomes in fish. A lot of more seasoned people in the trade will often say, I maintain water because that's one of the most important things I need to do. That's done through regular testing of water quality and very varied filtration systems. And another thing in terms of suitable environment is trade is in a very diverse range of species, so the requirements for aquarium size, enrichment, and other aspects can vary very widely. And also, they will also vary very widely between the shop and the home. So shops are transitional environments, so the expectations for welfare are going to be slightly different from what people deliver at home. Suitable diet, there's a wide array of feeds available that cater to the variety of dietary needs of the different fish that are on sale. So some of these might be algae-based, high protein, high insect content, that kind of thing. And in addition, for some species with more specialist needs, you have frozen and live feeds which mimic natural feedstuffs that they might experience in the wild. But this also can form a bit of enrichment in the same way that people provide specialist foods for their cats or dogs as a bit of a treat and to enrich them. People will do the same for their fish in the home as well with these feeds. And again, that diversity, I'm being waved on time. Okay. We can talk about that. We can talk about that later, and I'll leave the health bit to the fish vet over there that's about to speak to you next. Thank you very much.
So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Matt Metzeler, Managing Director of Aquatic Vets Limited. Dr. Metzeler is an aquatic veterinarian, founder of Aquatic Vets Limited, a global practice dedicated to the health and welfare of aquatic species. With over 2 decades of experience, Matt specialises in providing evidence-based solutions for aquaculture, public aquaria and research institutions. A diplomate of the European College of Aquatic Animal Health, Matt has a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the University of Utrecht and a PhD from Stirling, where he conducted pioneer research on the etiology of red mark syndrome and rainbow trout. So he works on fish health, disease management, biosecurity, and is particularly interested in sustainable aquaculture practices. So he's an expert in giving us the veterinary perspective. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, so to summarize that, I've been very fishy for a very long time. So more puns can be added later. So what we're going to talk about today is a very brief overview, because as I said, I've got about 25 years of experience as a fish health professional, as a vet later, because I started my fishy experience while I was a student at university, because I didn't even know you could do fish when I joined the veterinary college. So I was asked to talk about health and welfare of pet fish. And you'll see some of these pictures. They're not my pictures, because PowerPoint actually suggests these pictures. And I saw Lynn had one of the other pictures that I have as well. And we talked about some extreme varieties. I will challenge you to find a dog that has a spine similar to this one. Because a lot of these goldfish are very challenged in how they've been bred. I must say, with that, it's only a very small number of fish that have, and I think we can count them on one or two hands, that have these concerns around. And we have a lot more species, which we'll talk about a bit later. So again, another good example of how not to care for fish, a fish boil. Again, a suggestion by PowerPoint, and it's something that we should avoid, and I think we've moved on from that aspect, at least in the UK, because as I said, I work globally, and we have some challenges abroad where this is still quite apparent. I work a lot in Asia, and if you go to big markets in Bangkok, you'll be shocked how animal welfare is seen in other parts of the world. So what's out there? And there's a few books being mentioned. I'm currently reading this one. It's quite funny, because the first fish that's been discovered to have sex is named after David Attenborough, which is one of the knowledges, which he didn't really appreciate as much as the people discovering that had intended, I think. But there's a few things out there. So the RSPCA have welfare standards for our farmed fish, as what they do for their pet fish. There's some programs in Norway, being one of the bigger producers of salmon, called Fish Well. RSPCA have taken some of that, or have at least collaborated on that. As I mentioned, this book. We talked about your own education. I'm talking to the fish, to the vets in the room, and as you already sort of alluded to, you have not been educated very well when you went to uni. I'm part of a lot of the education being offered at universities, and it's very limited in my opinion. I was teaching on the course that was at my university when I was still in fourth year. But your clinical eye is important, and a lot of the skills you have are transferable. So you do have abilities to judge that, but you need to apply it with some specific knowledge. So quantifying something that you think is not right might be very difficult. So what can we do? So is it very difficult to do this? I don't think it has to be. Something that we work with within the industry is operating welfare indicators. So we talked about this. 60% of the vertebrates are fish, so there will always be exceptions. So we need to make sure what we look at is appropriate for the species. So some of these things that we have suggested, so mortality, is that a really good welfare indicator? I think we have to agree that that's not a good welfare indicator. But we are using that to really hone down on certain aspects. Fin quality is something that we really are looking at now, and it's something that we can assess quite easily. But fin position is something that we look at. It's a way of the fish to signal to us, and some of the things that we can use in that. Same as the position in the water. If they're not upright, that might be a problem, unless it's a flat fish that's lying on the bottom. So again, try to make sure that you don't look at the exceptions in a way that's welfare dependent. So can you make your own operating welfare indicators? Yes, you can, and I think it's good to do that. So it needs to be something that's easy, something that ideally isn't operator dependent. So something that you can all agree on and it's quantifiable, something that's measurable. Usually we have a scale of 1 to 3, or 0 being okay, depending on who does it. Sometimes 3 is okay and 0 is bad. But as long as you agree on the scale and the number of steps in between, I think you can come up with a good set of rules. So this is from Wellfish, one of these, and you can see some of these indicators. There's categories, there's defined points, and we can argue some of these things might not be necessary, but they're very quantifiable. Yeah? So the other thing that was asked about, because we talked about euthanasia today, and there was also a question about should we do the same things to fish as we should do to other animals, whereas I say some of the things that we do currently to animals, I think we shouldn't be doing anyway, because euthanasia is quite a welfare neutral option, and I think something that I practice quite a lot. If we can't fix it in fish, I'd rather euthanize the fish. So how are we going to do that? Because that's something that we should look at. There's a few legislations. So a Home Office, Schedule 1, that's all the research fish are covered by that. RSPCA in farmed fish have a guidance around culling and harvesting. And then the American associations of veterinary medicine have their guidelines. That's actually quite a good one, which I'll come into a bit more. But what's practical? Because if we look at all these methods, if you have to do some of these in your practice with an owner present, I think you shouldn't really do those, because stunning, with percussion stunning, i.e. giving them a slap on the head, isn't quite as welfare friendly to the owner, although it's really welfare friendly to the fish. So if you distill all of this into something that you can do yourself, I think over-anesthetizing is something that's very doable. There's a few over-the-counter products, so even if you advise the client to do it at home, clove oil is quite available, as the same as 2-phenoxyethanol, which is registered on the small animal exemption rule in the UK. If you don't have those products available, you can go to your own cupboards. This is not my cupboard, because I don't do normal animals, as I call them. I do fish, so there's a few things that you have in your own cupboard that you can try. Rapid chilling is being used for tropical species. Make sure you don't do that to cold water species, because that doesn't actually work. But if you have your tropical species, those can be applied to those. So just to finalize my presentation is about a lot of the vets haven't been taught. So the result of that is that the healthcare around fish has been taken up by non-vets. And we do have to recognize that. Depending on where you are in the world, vets can be a bit snobby about them being the experts. But in fish, we are not the experts. We have not been trained to do it. So why are we expecting to be the experts in it? What happened in mainly in aquaculture and other parts, we have a lot of associated professions that do provide a lot of the care. We still call it a vet-led team, because the vet still prescribes the medication, and there's a lot of the health direction or policy is being generated by vets. So, but there's a big group of non-vets that are present in that industry. So what do they do currently? So anesthetics is something that's been done. Blood sampling, which is actually quite a recent development, because although we were doing blood samples before, the reference values weren't always very good. So there's a few companies now looking at this, and we got much more bigger data sets, wherefore we can do. And one thing I forgot to say about the previous one is that fish aren't covered by the Veterinary Surgeon Act at the moment, which is something that makes a lot of this possible. Because under the Veterinary Act, we're not allowed to diagnose disease of animals unless you're a vet. But because fish aren't covered by that, you're allowed to diagnose disease of fish. Is that a problem? Currently not seeing that as a problem, because as I said, we have a lot of experts in that. But we are lobbying to get fish included in the Veterinary Act. And at that point, we need to sort of address some of these things that are currently done on a daily basis by these non-vets. So thank you very much for that. If there's any questions, my email and phone are there. You can WhatsApp me as well with any fishy pictures. So thank you.
Well, thank you to Matt and Matt for their excellent presentations. And it's question time. Can I remind you, you can submit questions via Slido in the Q&A, but we have, I think you were first. So, do you want to
go for it?
Want me to go first? Yeah, I'll go for it. I first want to say thanks so much to all three of you. Those talks were fantastic and really, really interesting and a really great topic to cover. My question for anyone who is brave enough to take it is, considering we were talking about a huge variety of species there, not just fish, you know, a huge variety of species, and I'd love to know what any of you think about the idea of introducing positive lists when it comes to fish, and ornamental fish in particular. You're already smiling. Considering, yeah, there's huge range, and we can't just say fish are okay to import on positive lists or have as companions or pets, but they're all going to have different needs. So are there any fish species that you think maybe we shouldn't have as companions or as pets?
We talked about this before. I'm from the Netherlands. I left the Netherlands 18 years ago. Even before I left the Netherlands, we were talking about positive lists in the Netherlands. And I go back every year, and they still haven't gotten a consensus around that. So even if my opinion on that is yes, and the practicality of that will be challenging, I think there's a few species that are difficult to keep, but I'm also saying that those species aren't really kept by people that aren't really capable of doing so. So of the 33,000 species of fish, only a small percentage are being kept, and the majority of species that are being kept are ones that could be easily kept.
Do you mind if I jump in on that as well? Do you mind if I jump in on that? So, yes, I mean, we talk about the variety of species that are being kept. I mean, one thing to kind of bear in mind is part of that variety is that you have lots of species from the same families and genuses that all have quite often have quite similar needs in terms of like water quality, husbandry, that kind of thing. I mean, there's probably several hundred species of tetra alone that enter the trade, and they all come from like, you know, similar areas within the Amazon. So it's not the case that variety necessarily means welfare is difficult to deliver. In terms of, you know, picking out certain species that, you know, might not be suitable, I think there's a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of technological advancement over the past like sort of 20, 30 years of fish keeping, and, you know, there are keepers in this country who have vast-sized aquariums. That's what they're into, and they can deliver those welfare outcomes. But you're right, it's probably not for the average keeper, but that doesn't mean they can't meet those welfare needs. So it's just making sure that keepers are adequately educated before they go ahead and purchase those animals.
Yeah, so there is a couple of groups, I would say, that shouldn't be kept, and there was a big fish campaign where they campaigned for species like Pangasius catfish, which become far too big for the home aquarium, and a lot of these species are then rehomed to public aquariums, but the public aquariums get full and they can't take them anymore. So I think education is really important, as Matt said. The other group that I would say shouldn't be kept are the fancy species of goldfish, which have these body conformations and bubble eyes and things, because they have significant health problems, very much like brachycephalian dogs. We have the same issue there. So I would say that those types of fancy goldfish, which always sort of end up in poor health and welfare in the home tank, just due to the fact of these strange conformations, that I think we should avoid keeping those. Next question, yeah.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Julia, a poultry vet from Crow's Hall. I just wanted to ask 2 questions, if that's all right. One is for Lynn specifically. So you mentioned in your presentation the sort of different assessments of sentience, but one of them for memory and learning, I think, there were human faces. So I just wanted to ask why that was chosen, because for me that seems a bit more human-centric because we can recognize the different faces, and I think that sort of begs a question of how we're designing these studies to assess their perception of the world, which might be very different from ours. And the second question is more, I guess, for the panel in terms of sort of fish for public display. I'm just curious, what do you think is the biggest welfare issues that's currently present? Thank you.
Yeah, so why did I choose the fish faces one? Because I can barely remember 44 faces in my class of 100 students. So I'm just wowed by the archerfish can do it better than I can. I'm sorry for that flippant answer. But the reason I chose that is because that study shows that we are very focused as humans on fish face, on people's faces, and animal faces, so dogs and cats. And yet we tend to think that fish are expressionless and sort of face is not important to them, it's chemical communication. And so I thought it was pretty fascinating that they can actually recognize the differences between the characteristics of quite similar faces and make a judgment. And it shows that they have that higher cognitive ability to actually recognize features, even when those features are rotated. And that shows how clever they are, how intelligent they are. That's why I chose that particular example. But I could have shown you many examples of them navigating complex mazes, of recognizing smells distinct from themselves and other fish. But that one, I think, showed that they have an ability that's more complex than just a simple learning a light switch on and then this thing happens. And so that's why I picked that. In terms of the public aquaria, I used to do a lot of work with public aquariums. I know the staff are absolutely dedicated to keeping the animals in good health and welfare. And so I guess Matt M, it'd be better if you're a veterinarian, you work for, I guess, in public aquaria.
Yeah, so we look after a couple of the public aquaria in the UK, and I'm in close contact with the other public aquaria in the UK. As Lynn suggested, these are expert keepers. That's their living. So on that aspect, there's not a lot of welfare issues. If you look further afield, Japan, America, some of the species they're keeping, in particularly whale sharks, I think are one of the species. I think there's some issues around there. But in general, no, the public aquaria are there to educate around local species and some of the other species, and they're well kept and well looked after by expert people. So no welfare concerns. And they're highly regulated as well under the zoo license.
So I did quite a lot with public aquaria, and actually, my confession, my husband was curator of one of the biggest aquariums here in the UK, and I think the welfare issues really stem from fish being brought in from the wild. They bring in a lot of strange diseases and parasites, and so the fish would have to undergo quite a comprehensive quarantine procedure with lots of treatments like copper and formalin, which is not good for the fish. And so that was one of the challenges, was quarantining the animals when they were coming in from the wild. So that's something that we need vets with fish experience to be able to treat, but it's certainly a significant challenge to making sure the aquarium stays disease-free. Next question, yeah.
Hi there, Josh from Vet Record. Forgive me, I've also asked a couple of questions in the chat, but you can ignore those because I don't want to sort of dominate the conversation. But I'm very curious about this whole issue. Just on the legal status, you talked about, there was mention of positive lists. Is there any legal restriction at all currently on what species of fish someone can own? So to use a very far-fetched example, could someone potentially legally own a great white shark if they could provide for it appropriately its care? I mean, are there any sort of DWA listed fish? And then on the legal status regarding their veterinary care, Matt, you were saying that you want fish to come under the Veterinary Surgeons Act, but then I understand there are potentially problems with that, because if there aren't actually enough vets who know what they're doing with fish, what would that mean for the welfare of fish? And are you saying that there are currently procedures that are going on with fish which non-vets are carrying out, and then if fish were to come under the VSA, the non-vets wouldn't be able to do those procedures? I didn't quite understand that.
So I think Matt Bond, if you go for the keeping a show.
Yeah, so in terms of limitations on species, I mean, yeah, I mean, DWA will apply. I don't think you'd be able to get a great white shark in your fish tank. I mean, the main limitation would be finding anyone that would be willing to import it for you, I'd imagine. But so that's probably, you're right, they're probably not. So I'm not entirely sure. But I mean, I don't think, yeah, again, I think the first hurdle you'd have would be anyone being willing to import it. In terms of other like legal limitations on like what species are allowed to be imported, the Fish Health Inspectorate maintain a list of species that can be imported under license for keeping within home aquaria. But that's done mainly on a biosecurity basis. So, for example, there are species that are known to could invade like UK rivers, or they could pass disease onto local populations. So that's one bit of legislation that limits the number of species. Your other question was related to treatment. Before I pass over to Matt, I mean, there are, you do have a lot of treatment that goes on within the trade itself. So there's a lot of commercially available treatments available for fish that keepers will undertake themselves. Obviously, beyond a certain level, you do need to go through a vet, but there is, as Matt's alluded to, it's not all delivered by veterinarians at the moment.
Yeah, so one, shark species are being imported. They are covered by certain aspects of the law. The zoo license will require them to be under the dangerous animals, depending on the species. Some of our clients have sand tiger sharks, which are 3-4 meter sharks. Fun to do a pathology report on. But with regards to the medicine, the toolbox for a fish vet is really limited. We're talking about some of the dyes and chemicals rather than medicines. So that's that. And then there was a question on on the Veterinary Act. So my comment there is, I think the legal protection under the Veterinary Act, I think, is important to have in place. There will be a period where we have some transfer of sort of grandfathering in of people that are looking for that, but all that can be done by training. What you see in other countries like Norway is that there's a bigger involvement of vets in that trade, and there will be a supply requirement for that. Having said that, fish vets don't have out of hours, really well paid, so by all means, I'll come to the lovely side. Weather is an issue. Sometimes it's a bit windy, but yeah.
Just to add to that, in laboratories, it's typically the scientists treating the fish, and usually you just let the named vet know, because they have absolutely no experience with fish, and they just rely on the scientists to actually conduct the treatments. Okay, do we have another question? Yeah.
Just to comment on that while we go to the other one, is that there is a change in that where specialist vets are now coming in. So we provide specialist fish veterinary advice to MVSs where they cover the rest of the animals, and we only provide fishy named veterinary services. Sorry.
Is there someone here?
So since you put it up there, RSPCA. RSPCA assured, I've pretty much seen nothing but horror, and that's cross-sector, but fish seems particularly uniformly diabolical. I wondered what you thought of those standards in terms of fish sentience and welfare, whether you think the RSPCA should be assuring that. And I wasn't sure whether you were suggesting we refer to those standards in terms of how we care for fish.
So that's a loaded question, I think. But So diabolic, I think, is not necessarily the right term. There are aspects that need improvement, and I think over the whole RSPCA scheme, there's non-compliance, and I think the non-compliance is being looked at. The other thing is that we are now looking beyond RSPCA. So there's no fish farm that doesn't want to comply with RSPCA or higher welfare standards. We are talking about vast numbers of fish. And if you will look at some of the available footage of compromised fish welfare, I think it's a very minute percentage of the fish that are being there that's been taken out of context. So,
sorry, this is about pet fish, and whilst I do appreciate the question on RSPCA assured and having spoken to them many times, I also agree with you that aquaculture fish welfare could be substantially improved. Their take on it is that, of course, that if you're with the certificate, they can work with the industry to try and raise standards. But the problem really comes down to the fact that there's very little legislation when it comes to fish. The legislation's not there, and that's why we see very poor welfare. We see 17 million salmon dying last year in salmon farms in Scotland, which I personally think is unacceptable. So, but we are talking about pet fish, so if anybody has any more questions about pet fish. We do have a question on Slido about wild-caught versus farmed pet fish, and I was just wondering, Matt, if you could answer this one. What percentage of pet fish in the UK are wild-caught? How many are farmed? And then why aren't we farming or breeding more in the UK?
Okay, cool. That's a very good question. So in terms of the majority of sourcing for the pet trade is in captive bred animals. For fresh water, it's typically about 95% of those are produced in captivity. For the marine portion of the trade, which is the smaller part of the trade, it's around about 15%, which are captive bred. Now, for marines, a big part of the reason is that a lot of the marine fish that are sold in the trade have very complex life cycles, like complex planktonic life cycles, which can't be replicated very easily in captivity by captive breeding programs. That's not to say that trade can't be sustainable, and also with a lot of the wild capture as well, there's there are conservation benefits to wild capture, so that's something that we talk about quite a lot. So some of the most remote and poor communities around the world, small island developing states, for example, that source wild-caught fish, then engage in pro-conservation behaviours, so reef restoration, for example, and also a lot of the alternative livelihoods aren't very are probably quite a lot worse for those environments as well. Things like benthic trawl fishing, or if you're talking about the Amazon, you're talking about logging as well. So that's sort of your overview of the wild-caught situation for the trade.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, Charlie.
Charlotte Byrne from Royal Veterinary College. You mentioned a little bit about conformational changes, and I wondered if you could tell us a little more about the extent to which fish are being bred to have extreme conformations or different colours or, I don't know, elongated fins, and as well as noticing these changes, whether you've noticed any effects on their welfare.
Oh, I mean, before I pass to you guys, I mean, yes, there's selective breeding going on, as with any pet animal. The extent to which that constitutes a welfare concern is, I think, it's up for debate. It really depends on what those changes are. There's probably a hell of a big difference between a Danio that's been bred to have slightly longer fins versus a fancy goldfish, for example, that's got significant motility problems. I think the real big problem with it is there really needs to be a bit more evidence gathering on it. I think there's a lot of unknowns around that stuff. I mean, Lynn's doing a lot of work on this stuff, I'm sure, and Matt as well. But yeah, so yes, there is selective breeding, but probably need to know a bit more to understand what those welfare outcomes are.
Yeah, so as I said, I don't come across a lot of these fish for various reasons. One, because we don't really do those type of pet fish. That's sort of a financial thing, because you can't really charge for what you should be charging. But also, I don't do things like wemtering. So the lion head, which is the one with the big sort of tumor on its head, needs some trimming every now and then. I don't perform that. It's not all of those. So I don't really condone any of that part of that. But as I said, there's only a small number of species that I consider to be of that category.
So Charlie, there's very little science on that kind of work. We know that certain fancy goldfish types have specific problems. They sort of, when the eyes migrate up to the upward-looking place, the animals become blind, and there has been sort of artificial selection for many traits in fish species, but the science just isn't there to give you an answer. So that's maybe something we could collaborate on in the future. Okay, so I think we're nearing the end of our session, sadly, and we're going to repeat the Slido questions just to see if your opinion has changed over this session. Have we convinced you to alter your perception? So are fishes sentient? So far we have 100% yes. So I think we have seen a slight shift. I'm very pleased to see that indeed. So let's move on to the next question. Do you think welfare is covered in? I can't see that anyone's going to change their mind on that one. Still no. And our next question, I think we'll just move on to the next one. Have we changed our mind about affording fishes the same protections as mammals? And I think we see perhaps a slight shift in the positive there. And well, thank you very much for sharing your opinions with us. We were absolutely delighted to speak to you. Thanks to Matt Metzeler, Matt Bond, for sharing their expertise. And I hope you enjoy this final talk from our leader. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I won't keep you long, he says, with a huge amount to say. I just wanted to mention right from the start the tragically sad passing of a former AWF trustee and a giant of our profession, Simon Doherty. Many eloquent tributes have been paid to him, and I cannot add to them other than to say animal welfare and the profession truly benefited from Simon's work. What a legacy to leave. Anyway, come on, chaps. Where else will you get a meeting dedicated to animal welfare like this with debate and interest? I thought it was excellent, but I told you I was biased right from the start. Behaviour. I did like the expression accessing the inaccessible. In this excellent continuation from last year, showing how understanding and assessing emotion and behaviour is critical in gaining better welfare. This is a result of good research and a large degree of lateral thinking, which I'm always amazed. This doesn't fall into, ooh, isn't that interesting, but it's now becoming an essential question we have to ask ourselves. And a preference for enrichment in reptiles, that particularly struck me, as enrichment was a theme throughout the day. Sadly, Julianne had to pull out at the last minute due to illness. We wish her a speedy recovery, and thank you to the rest of the speakers for manfully filling the gap. Breeding for better welfare. The World Organization for Animal Health definition of welfare includes social dimensions. We got a faithful of those today. Rowena had some good news in there, mixed unfortunately with sad things like fur babies, designer breeds still rule AK. Are we experiencing a shifting baseline syndrome as what is accepted by the public and us as normality begins to inexorably move in the wrong direction? Rabbits, are they just suffering from being rabbits, low down on the socio-zoological scale as well as cost? It's interesting that you can't always make an assumption just on their morphology in these cases. Research and data, again, is key. There should be a law against it, which is the usual knee-jerk cry. Well, it seems there are laws against them. Should we be using them? Dan rightly made us squirm. Where do we fall on the bell curve of belligerence, I asked earlier? Well, perhaps not far enough. We can't expect the law to solve all our problems. It is our role as professionals, greatly assisted by many organisations, and a key one today being the BVA, is to keep knocking on the door to make a difference. And I cynically am concerned that my knuckles are beginning to bleed. Farm animal welfare. So often do we meet the sacred cow of economics coming up against welfare, to which we must always add the environmental cost and carbon footprint these days. As an ex-livestock practitioner, I can't always help having a degree of empathy for the UK farmer who is always piggy in the middle. And we can't chicken out again and export our welfare problems to other countries. I liked the use of the word humanity within these talks. It was good to hear a proper dive into this issue and how a policy and perhaps a more legal framework and assurance scheme surrounds this area compared to a relative paucity of that in the small companion animal sector. So what have I done to change my meat-eating habits? Well, quite a lot actually, thanks to the discussion forum and thanks to talks like this. Welfare still needs someone to pay for it and needs to pay for it with their money. Thank you for James, wherever you are, for stepping in the last minute. And thank you, Neil, for not being called to the House of Commons. And thank you, Matt Dobbs, who's sitting somewhere at the back, for being the sacrificial lamb just in case Neil was called away. He was going to leap in with his normal eloquence. Last year, we were told by one of our speakers on insects to be wary of your intuitions. Well, I think the same very much applies to fish, sentient creatures. How on earth do I know if it's got a life worth living? Just because it's swimming around on its own, mournfully calling out for its mate Bob with a blingy castle as its sole enrichment? Well, I discovered one thing today: it'll probably spit in my face, and I don't blame it. This was a fascinating and brilliant session. It was eye-opening and so reminiscent of other issues we've heard about other species today when man starts to interfere with them. Again, I want to acknowledge the impact Simon Docherty had. Please read the excellent BVA position statement on finfish. There is so much we need to know and learn about these species. And just as in the behaviour session, how do we learn to assess their welfare other than just monitoring their health? Our lightning talks, Carolyn, continuing on the theme of today, bringing the 5 domains to life and into the profession's consciousness. A positive state, a good life. She challenged us on it. Hugh, a learned and reasoned talk, regards the use of carbon dioxide in pig stunning and how other more humane methods exist, namely argon. Is this just another inconvenient truth we have ignored for many years? The student research updates, I really do like those. I, each year, am simply amazed at their abilities. Sky, taking a novel approach on a problem, looking at health, obesity, and the environment in a true interdisciplinary approach with novel conclusions. Chloe, lab rats, just because they're low down on our socio-zoological scale, their welfare matters, and correct handling and a proper attention to these sentient beings means continued improvement in their welfare. How we approach animals, what side of bed do we get out of this morning, all seems to have a consequence on that species. I'm proud to say this year we have funded 5 student projects. We had many applications, which was brilliant. We were helped by a generous donation from the Benefact Group, and we spent it all and a bit more. Neve Connell and her work on broiler cage enrichment again, we all have heard the real potential for a positive welfare impact on a vast number of animals. Science matters, and so does enrichment, it appears. Lindsay Henderson It's fascinating to consider the natural exposure to light eggs have in the wild and what are the implications for chick behaviour and development. Where eggs are solely incubated in the dark, once more man's invention, not nature's. Let's always start with the species biology, and guess what? Enrichment came into this again. Leslie Jessamine, a real One Health view. We're so reliant on good stock people in the livestock industry, and here's the project looking at the human consequences as they relate to difficult or, as one might say, irrational decision making when you've got too many piglets. The welfare of animals and the welfare of stock people, aren't they just the same issue? The consequences of killing is something I personally have some knowledge about, having killed thousands during the foot and mouth outbreak, and we heard quite a bit about the consequence of that outbreak today. Neve Mahan, breeding animals for resilient feet, a proper exploration of contextualised care approach in this perennial problem in sheep. The vet-farmer relationship remains central, and please have a plan, and remember, financial still has a cost when it comes to welfare. I hope this answers someone's gripe to me the other week that all we do is fund small animal studies. Anyway, today would have not worked just so brilliantly without our excellent, knowledgeable and expert speakers and chairs who gave so freely of their time. We're truly in your debt, and I'm sure you'd once again like to show your appreciation in the normal way. Thank you very much. Thank you again to our generous sponsors, Agria Pet Insurance, Pets at Home, Mars Fish Care, Hills Pet Nutrition, Vet Partners and MWI Animal Health. We couldn't have done this so well without you, and I do hope as sponsors you also enjoyed the event and want to come back again. A big shout out to the BVA for your endless help today and your support during the year. We couldn't have done this without you. I trust you can all see the synergy of our close collaboration. AWF is a non-campaigning charity. BVA is, and it does it so much better and with authority. And of course, it certainly wouldn't have worked without your participation as delegates, so thank you very much from myself and the trustees. Please give us feedback, somewhere up there. Yep, it's vital in understanding the value of this event and helps us shape and improve it. Indeed, every year is influenced by what you have told us. So you will be sent a link for a follow-up email, or even easier, just scan the above codes and get your CPD certificates now. Lastly, I just want to talk about the yin and yang of charity life. Sadly, as many other charities are experiencing, the financial winds are not set fair, such that we've had to make some difficult decisions throughout the year. We have a duty to ensure that our finances go on our charitable aims, and I don't need to spell out the difficulties faced by many institutions and the lack of research money. Unfortunately, animal welfare research is likely to become a casualty in the coming years. AWF are aiming to increase that spent on research and education. Our call out the other week for research projects resulted in a sheer deluge of replies. That's got to say something about the changing climate. One thing that has come out loud and clear today is the value of that research to our profession, indeed society as a whole, as well as the animals we're responsible for. I'm very proud of the research AWF has commissioned to date, some £2 million plus of it, and the value it has given back today. So I will shamelessly plead with you, if you have enjoyed today, appreciated all that you've heard and seen, please become a regular donor or consider a legacy to AWF. Can you take action now? Speak to me or any of the trustees when we meet afterwards. The real and tangible impact we have made as a result of past generous donations and the impact on animal welfare is substantial. So enough from me. Thank you very much. For those of you returning home, safe journey, and for the rest, see you shortly to keep the conversation rolling. Thank you very much.